As Lisa mentioned, my name is Matt Bonn, and I'm going to speak about activism in harm reduction and kind of what that looks like advocating for a safe drug supply. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land where I work and the presentation where it was created was in Mi'kmaq, the ancestral unceded territory of Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by the treaties and treaties of friendship, which Mi'kmaq and the Malachi people first signed with British Crown in 1725. We're all treaty people. We have a few national and international affiliations. I recently just took a job with the Canadian AIDS Society. I'm the communications manager. I do a lot of knowledge translation work for the Profiteer AIDS Foundation, which is based out of Vancouver. I sit on the International Network of Health and Hepatitis Care for Substance Users. It's an international conference that meets every year in a different, tries to meet every year on a different continent. And I run the social media for the International Journal of Drug Policy. Next slide. I also do a lot of freelance writing for Filter Magazine, which is a harm reduction and drug policy media outlet based out of New York. We transition a lot of the research that we do into plain language media pieces that are easily digestible for the public. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the public health emergencies, people whose drugs have been facing. I always like to say that we're in a syndemic of health and social issues that interact to worsen and to accelerate the disease progression of these health and social issues. So, people who use drugs have been experiencing a lot longer before COVID-19. We had this overdose crisis that has been going on for, decades. We've had mass incarceration rates, especially in North America. There's, the incarceration rates are ridiculous, and we're right now we're especially in a affordable housing crisis, and all these things interact with one another to make the lives of people who use drugs so they can't really have a productive and fulfilling life. So it's important that we have to look at all these things in the context of COVID, but we also have to look at them both sides and try to intersect and figure out the solution for each one of them. So I'm going to talk about what it's like to be an advocate, what it's like to advocate for someone, and what it's like to be involved in activism. And I think my role as somebody who, as Lisa said, I'm somebody with lived experience. I'm someone who uses drugs. I've been tested and treated for hepatitis C because of my drug use, and I just want things to get better for people who use drugs. So I've been able to kind of publicly support or suggest ideas to develop a way of doing something, right? I've been an advocate for a lot of harm reduction initiatives. Advocacy is kind of more the public support. So, trying to get the general kind of consensus of, we all want to see this cause move forward. This is a movement that's particularly important to us as individuals. So we're going to advocate for, we're going to be involved in advocacy. And then activism is the use of direct and noticeable action to achieve results, usually a political or social one. And I'm going to talk about some different examples of activism. Back in the 60s, we had, the human rights, the equal rights movement, followed by the HIV and AIDS kind of movement in the 80s and 90s. Now we're seeing, more kind of, homophobia and transphobia movements. So we're, people that are shocked in that, and this is happening all over the world. Then there's a lot of sex workers' rights and human rights issues. Sex workers have rights too. Sex work is work. And this one is particularly interesting. It's actually the Canadian HIV Legal Network. They've been trying to make sure that the prison health system is adequate and that prison health is public health. So people that are in prison are getting the same kind of health care that people outside prison get as well. So nothing about us without us is a very important it's like a centerfold of what we'd like to see when we're talking about these issues. You know, we want to see nothing about ourselves. So that's having people who are directed by these movements being impacted, leading the way, being paid to work in the field, being interviewed and researched, being interviewed in the media, just whatever we can do to empower people who use drugs to be a part of the movements for safe supply, for decriminalization, for all these important elements of drug policy it's going to have a sustainable, more longer acting impact for people who use drugs and for us as a society. So, as I said, I work in the harm reduction field. I do more policy work now than I did. I used to do a lot of advocacy and a lot of outreach and direct service delivery. But in Canada, where harm reduction has really evolved, we did see a big boom in Europe in the 80s and 90s. But it came to Vancouver, harm reduction and the 4-pillar model. And they, so, when you look at public health, you have, enforcement, treatment, education, and prevention, and they wanted to add harm reduction as a pillar. And Vancouver was very successful in that. The picture on my left is Dean Wilson and Oppenheimer Park. They took 1,000 crosses, and this is in the late 90s, when HIV and overdose crisis was really impacting a lot of people. But we didn't see the type of drugs that we're seeing today. But they still had very negative impacts on people, so they wanted to see them. They also took a coffin from the downtown east side, and they walked it into the mayor's office, which is something that we did actually a few years ago as well. We didn't take it into the mayor's office, but we took it down to City Hall on overdose awareness day, and I'll speak a little bit more about that in a little bit. So this organization on my bottom left here, or bottom right, whatever way you're looking at it, is the Drug Policy Alliance. They've been doing a lot of innovative stuff in North America, and they really have changed this narrative around safer drug use, and they're based out of the US. And then this guy right here is a great advocate. Bud Osborne, he's a poet. Actually, he got involved in activism through poetry. And I'm just honored to be an advocate for some of these people today. So yeah, as I mentioned, a lot of us, a lot of us in this room have either worked for or worked out the overdose prevention site, but I was instrumental at getting it up and running and trying to advocate for it long term. And that's where drug testing really kind of came into the Nova Scotia scene. When we started to kind of use drug tests was when we were advocating for the overdose prevention sites. So back in 2018, 2019, there was a lot of discussions around, people don't have a safe place to use drugs. And, we were seeing numbers rise in overdose deaths every year. I've lost so many people that I can't even keep count of them anymore. And, I just didn't think it was fair. I was going to Toronto, I was going to Vancouver, I was going all over the country and going to visit sites. And I was like, they have just this really wicked, intervention to really support people, when they're most in need, and why can't we have something like that in Nova Scotia? So it took us probably a year or two really advocating hard before we applied to get an exemption from the Controlled Drugs and Substance Act. But we did that under the umbrella of the Halifax Overdose Prevention Society, because at the time there was some threats to the funding. And yeah, it was a whirlwind of a lot of advocacy for a little bit. Every week we were on different media outlets, but it really did start to change this narrative. And I think Halifax has become a very a hub for people who use drugs on the East Coast. So as I said, using the media to really set our set the movement, it was really important to who is our ally? So like, okay, so we have Alexa McLean who wrote a lot of these pieces. So, that was like a huge ally in global news that, we could always reach out to if we had a story that we wanted to create. A lot of times it was just kind of like, okay, so a journalist is going to want an objective kind of output. So if they had like somebody like myself, a drug user, and somebody involved with Halifax, maybe we could reach out to Dr. Tommy Brothers to show the other side of the coin. So, to have that, to balance out the perspectives and the views. So we, for a while we were in the media every week. And, I think it's kind of died down a little bit now. But, we do have a site that's up and running, so, we don't have to continuously be advocating for things. But, this is a model that, I think we've seen in other places that, we just kind of have to use what we have to our advantage, right? If it's like compassionate journalists, then it's compassionate journalists. And I think, nowadays with the media and how everything is ran, it's all online. It's like, okay, we want a picture, a story, you get one or two people to comment on it, and then you get a good journalist to write a piece on it, and that can really change. That can really give your movement a lot of pull. We'll talk a little bit about using writing as advocacy and then research as advocacy. And this is, like, these were just like ways, and these are like not it's not your Globe and Mail, it's not like huge media outlets, but it's respectable kind of organizations that have like blog posts or whatnot, and they reach out, hey, do you want to write a piece about Halifax opening Landon, Canada's first overdose prevention site? And I say, sure, no problem. And like I did that for a while too. So it wasn't like having your mainstream media like put it into the general society, and it was maybe writing a piece every other week, right? And we use organizations like Katie, which is the Canadian HIV and AIDS kind of information organization based out of Toronto. They do like blog posts, and they're always trying to highlight innovative harm reduction services that are opening, or new ones that are coming to light, or maybe just some advocates that are doing cool work in there. We also kind of like this was before COVID, but then once COVID happened, it was really like everything went online, and it was just everything was bombarded with media. But like other things that we're really trying to do in Landon, Canada, like right now I'm a part of a class action lawsuit that's going against Nova Scotia criminal justice system for strip searching people at prison. A lot of times people get strip searched for their medication, so they get strip searched if they're on opioid agonist therapy, which is insane, right? There's no evidence to show that strip searching is going to reduce the amount of diversion of this medication, but so that's going to go to a class action, a proposed class action in March. And yeah, this place has really been like the Morton Library has been a pillar and a great place for us to meet and talk about a lot of these issues. So yeah, there's also this conversation around decriminalizing drug use. BC, as we know, just decriminalized up to 2.5 grams of opioids, opioids, methamphetamine, cocaine, or I'm missing one of them. There's 4 classes of drugs that they decriminalized, but we're also seeing other jurisdictions across Canada apply for exemptions to the Controlled Drugs and Substance Act. For example, right now Toronto is in the midst of applying for one with no exceptions, so no threshold. So you could have pretty much whatever, and you're not going to be criminalized for it. And there's pros and cons to kind of all this stuff, and I think it's important that we do look at criminalization as a method of an intervention as we go forward, but we also need to pair that with a safe supply of drugs. So I've been involved in a lot of research lately, and I like to use this as advocacy. Because when you take your words and you put them through peer review articles in the peer review kind of process, they just have a little bit more hold to them, so. They've been involved with a lot of different qualitative work. One, we studied kind of overdose response in the era of COVID, so how to spot someone so you never have to use alone. So essentially what we did is we talked to people who use drugs who were looking out for one another during, the isolation and during COVID, and just spotted them. And, so they had, if somebody overdosed on the phone, they had an overdose event response plan. They called 911, they gave them the address, and people actually intervened. And, so it provides this way to make sure that people don't have to use drugs alone, and that you can use drugs 100% with someone all the time, and essentially no one should have to die from using drugs alone. And we actually talk to people how to do that in an informal way, and how to do that in like a more organic kind of service way, like the National Overdose Response Service. And what were some of the pros and cons to that? Also, we wrote a piece published in the Journal of Studies on Alcohol and Drugs, addressing the syndemic of HIV, hepatitis C, overdose, and COVID-19 among people who use drugs, potential roles for decriminalization and safe supply. And this was one of my first author publications that I have for research articles. And it was published in JSAC, which is the oldest journal related to alcohol and drugs. And it's interesting because it's an older journal based in the US, so there's some conservative pieces that kind of were published with that, but they were all from top tier academic institutions such as Yale and Stanford and Brown. So it's really interesting to see kind of like what perspectives were coming from other places in North America on these topics. I was also part of a systematic review around social and structural determinants of injection-related bacterial and fungal functions among people who inject drugs. So we know a lot of people get injection-related infections and actually die from that aspect of drug use. We don't talk about it as much. So we published a protocol today, and then we also published some of our qualitative systematic review in the addiction journal. And another one we have around overdose, death, and HIV infections among people who use drugs, shared determinants, and integrated responses. And that actually came from an addiction medicine resident from the US that reached out to us in Canada and asked if we wanted to write an editorial piece. So a lot of them are editorial pieces, but a lot of them are also direct research as well. But we see some of the things that people who use drugs are reading, they typically tend to be more like a commentary or perspective articles. And then you get more research scientists that are leading some of the direct scientific analysis. This was a piece that we actually did in Nova Scotia here with the COVID-19 shelter-based for people experiencing COVID-19 and experiencing homeless. And if we supply them a safe supply of drugs and manage alcohol, and the result was people didn't, they actually isolated when they got a safe supply of drugs. Like very few people didn't actually throw isolation protocols if they were prescribed the drugs that they were prescribed. So like that's really essentially what it comes down to. We give people the substances that they want, and they're gonna respond to us in a positive output. Yeah, these are just a couple of different research papers that I can involve with. That's fun. So yeah, I just wanted to talk today about, really about some of the drugs that we're seeing on the street and some of the drugs that we're seeing, in our communities. These are all drugs that like I've either purchased here locally in Nova Scotia, but usually they would come either like online, they come from like Toronto or BC, but typically like the main vendor that I have, I buy them. I go online. I buy drugs. I send them a thing. Within 2 or 3 days, I get the drugs delivered right to my mailbox. And essentially, on the left, we're seeing like this red fentanyl that was being sold for a while. This actually had traces of xylazine, and that was interesting because we haven't seen a lot of xylazine on the East Coast yet, on the East Coast of Canada, but we are seeing it a lot on the East Coast of the US. But it's just a red drug. You don't really see like a drug with that kind of that flake color to it. But it was like it was besides the xylazine, it was a really strong note. But we do tend to see a lot of like purple stuff. Like this is typically like the type of the color of drugs that we see, a purple kind of bluish. A lot of times it has been benzodope, so it's been etolazam, flurazepam, combined with fentanyl analogs. And the next slide I have so these are all drugs that I bought here. And I would send them away to get tested at getyourdrugstested.com. So getyourdrugstested.com is an online based organization that is based out of Vancouver. You can send your drugs away. You send them away with like a little slip that's got your name, your address, your email address, and as soon as they test it, they'll send you the results email. So like really, you can probably get the results within like a week. Now, it's not ideal. Like essentially, you want to like be testing things before you actually personally consume them. But it is kind of an interesting intervention that can be used and can be scaled up. There, the East Coast has a lot of Xanax bars that a lot of times are not Xanax. They're etolazam, they're flurazepam, bromozolam, and even more so, a lot of times they have been contaminated with fentanyl and fentanyl analogs. And then, interesting, these candies here, this is actually etolazam liquid that were being sold on like sweet tarts. And I think it's concerning that the drugs being made into candy and things like that. But I don't think it's like I remember trying to get those and they were really hard to get, and it was just like, okay, like be very careful. Like I don't think organized crime really tries to pull in kids as much as we like to think they do. But seeing drugs kind of being sold as candy is concerning. So the current drug supply is more toxic than ever before, and this is just like this is what causes a lot of the great deal of harm that people who use drugs are experiencing. But there's an alternative. There is a safe supply of drugs. So what this is, it's pharmaceutical alternatives. It's a lot of hydromorphone. The East Coast has, a lot of times have had a lot of mainly prescription opioids as kind of the substance of choice to use. But I think it provides us an interesting place to kind of like swoop in before we do see tons more fentanyl that is kind of showing up here and being sold here. So I'm quickly going to talk about a couple models of safe supply, and then I'll be done. So there's three different models that I really like to highlight. One, there's heroin-assisted treatment, there's medical safe supply, and then there's compassion clubs. And kind of like heroin-assisted treatment and medical safe supply is very kind of, a heroin is very a medicalized approach. So it's why it's an arrow in between. It's very much similar to kind of a medical safe supply. Same with medical safe supply and compassion clubs. Like we can kind of see this on the spectrum instead of as different models. And this is kind of the original concept by Dr. John Marks, is if you have, on the left axis, you got social health harms, all the way up, you have the unregulated criminal market and prohibition on your left as well. And then if we want to see kind of a strict regulation and control with an unregulated legal market, we're going to have to kind of do so down here in kind of this strict regulation and control. So we don't want to just give drugs to everybody. We want to have it under a controlled and strict regime. So heroin-assisted treatment, medical safe supply, compassion clubs all fall underneath this kind of this concept here. So it's really important that we look at safe supply in this concept of a public health approach. So it was created by Dr. John Marks in the UK. It's operational in various countries around the world, including Switzerland, Netherlands, Germany, United Kingdom, and Canada. There's extensive peer-reviewed academic literature, like you don't need to study this anymore. Every city should have a heroin-assisted treatment clinic. And really the issue lies right now in how we get it in enough heroin for people to use, because it's blocked at a federal level due to special access program. It's very medical, but it works for the target population. This is the Crosstown Clinic. It's on Wesley, it's on Hastings Street in Vancouver. Now the Dr. Peter Center, where I do some knowledge translation work, they also provide heroin for their clinic as well. So it has expanded a little bit. I think we thank COVID to do that, but there's still all kinds of clinics that we would like to see operational. So medical safe supply. The most common medications include hydromorphone, so that's Dilaudid, heroin, slow release oral morphone, etc. Various programs offer powdered fentanyl, fentanyl, and fentanyl patches. They are all prescribed by a physician and picked up at a clinic or a pharmacy, and it's very hard to receive take-home doses. So, if you want to try to work, go back to school, or kind of have any kind of like engagement or fulfilling employment opportunities, it's really hard to get your on kind of a lot of these things, but it's essential to kind of get your life back in order to reclaim it. So we'll talk a little bit about the powdered fentanyl program that's operating in Vancouver downtown instead. And this is a conversation that was in the Canadian Medical Association Journal. And I love the quote that I have more structure. There isn't much reliability in trying to survive off street dope, and you never know what they put in it. And really, they're giving people like 1,000 micrograms of powdered fentanyl with some kind of cut, and then they can have options now where you can go and you can go buy the fentanyl. So it's all through the Portland Hotel Society. Dr. Prithvi Sutherland, actually, she's born from Halifax. She's from Halifax here. She's in Vancouver, and she's been leading a lot of this through the medical community. And this is a quote from Dr. Christopher Sutherland. I want them to break up with their drug dealer. If I were doing this 100 years ago, I'd be prescribing opium tea. So just acknowledging how much the drug supply has shifted and how much it's changed. And Compassion Club. So Compassion Club is a club where people pool together their money to buy safe drugs cheaper, and these happen all the time informally. But if we can provide more comprehensive harm reduction services like drug testing and stuff, it can allow these clubs to happen a lot more frequently, a lot more effectively. So essentially, everyone pools their money together to buy drugs. They test the drug before, so they'll test it to know what the quality and quantity and quantity of the substances are. They can do this, a lot of times, like the Drug Use Liberation Front, they'll test drugs, then they'll use the DIPS test. So they'll use all the resources available, all the kind of testing methods available to test the substances. So then they can't be criticized for not doing the job, not saying, okay, well, we didn't check this aspect of drug testing. Drugs become a lot cheaper when bought in bulk. So, obviously, it doesn't make sense to test the substances per use. If you can test the drugs before they get distributed, it's going to be a lot more effective and a lot more lives will be saved. And no known quality and quantity reduces overdose. So, just so when people know exactly what they're using, they don't overdose as much. And it's just been studied. So the fact that, if you know what's in it, you can dose your drug properly and use it. The Drug User Liberation Front, they're operating kind of the main Compassion Club in Canada, and they've been given doses of heroin, cocaine, and meth at various different kind of monumental stages. So every month in BC they have like a monthly report of all the overdose deaths. When those numbers get really high, they'll give out a bulk of X amount of drugs to people that are involved in the compassion club. So there's about 200 plus people involved in it now. They buy their drugs online, and it's a really innovative program. They actually made drugs over the front of the police station dressed like Willy Wonka, and so they've been very brave and very just like, I don't care, I'm going to do what I'm going to do. I'm going to hand the drugs out. This is what's saving lives. And they're actually challenging like SUAP, and they're challenging a lot of like federal programs that have not funded them, because they asked for funding from these programs multiple times. So they're, they have a court challenge that it's going forward. So how it works, they go online, they go on the dark web, they navigate the market. So I've talked to the folks that run Dolph a couple times. I've actually gotten drugs from Dolph. Right now they have a compassion club that's operating where you can go and just buy them. So if I'm in Vancouver and I want to use drugs, and they're like, okay, well, we know Matt's in town, and we may not have the same tolerance to a lot of these drug supply. We're going to allow them to come and buy drugs with the out of town handle. So they have all these different ways to get drugs to people that are going to use them. They buy drugs on the dark web. They get sent to their little office in the downtown side. They do their quality control, so they test them. They have various different, like they have FPIR testing, they have testing strips. They do all that right there in their office. They package and label them. For a while, they had like little boxes that they were giving them out in. Now they give them out in like this little sleeves, so it's a lot more like friendly to the environment. And then they do they're doing an evaluation that's doing a 6 month, 12 month qualitative and quantitative evaluation, and then they distribute the drugs. So that's essentially what the compassion club is. You need to know somebody to kind of get in, but they're pretty open, especially for visitors in time to kind of drop by and see. They offer an overdose prevention service on side of the compassion club as well. So this is what it looks like. What my sweater is. This is when they were offering them over the boxes, so you can see everything they have. It's very keep away from children and pets, not for sale, ingredients, methamphetamine, ingredients, heroin and caffeine. Like they got it really down to the science of like how to make sure you know what you're going to use before you use it. No one can argue that, okay, well, I didn't think it was cocaine. It says it right there, it's in the box. And it just makes what they're seeing from their research are like, just people don't overdose as much, and they've never had an overdose yet in their clubs. So something has to be working right, and especially in the landscape of Vancouver and the drug supply, it's extremely concerning. So right now, the status quo is really to support the criminalization of drugs and support organized crime, cartels, murder, the toxic drug supply. So really, I think it's about informing people. How do we effectively support people in turning away from these things? And how do we put our money into harm reduction services rather than give it to organized crime? And I think the more we can do that, the better we're going to be. So just some next steps of regulation. So use the community-based organizations to control the drug market. There's no need for a commercial model that profits from every time someone uses drugs. You don't need to be commercializing this and having the advertising. Drugs get sold word of mouth, and that's fine here. I don't think you should really use marketing approaches to upsell drugs. Medical safe supply forces drugs control and police prescription drugs. The more we can move away from this, the better. So we don't really want people to feel like they're in control of providing people with a safe supply of drugs. We would like to spread this around like we do in the law. And you don't go to your doctors for a bottle of wine, so why do you go to your doctors for a line of cocaine? All safe supply models are needed until we have regulated drug supply. Shouldn't wait for any more research before prescribing safe supply. We need alternative options for different drug models. And safe supply to match the current unregulated drug supply. For example, there's a safe supply of prescription benzodiazepines that aren't being used, and we really should have what people are using on the street. I just want to say in memory of some of the people that I've lost over the years. Thank you.
We kind of got volunteering is a privilege, and that's something that I'm pretty passionate about. And we pay people to volunteer, which I guess is technically
That's not a volunteer yet.
not volunteer anymore. Yeah, and I think that's probably my most important part, because when I was like growing up, I wasn't doing a lot of volunteering because I needed to make money.
Yeah.
And volunteering doesn't make you money.
Yeah. It is a privilege.
So just, there's some tech difficulties where the slides are frozen and we're certainly not where we are. So we all know, we're still on like the sports services slide. Go ahead though, we're gonna keep doing that. We can see where we.
My favorite part is supporting the unhoused people. I like to be the people who really need our services.
Yeah. Naomi's my partner in crime when it comes to outreach and folks.
I think it's a really beautiful thing that we can provide non-judgmental services to folks, and I'm someone who's utilized that service many times, just having a non-judgmental ear to listen to me, and be able to provide just even that sounding board of what's going on in my life without any bias being brought back into it.
I enjoy that I'm part of a group that for the first time I'm actually included in. It makes me feel valued like other youth and doesn't make me feel different. I like doing the food bank where we cook food and then put it in there, and also where we go out and help other people who are like in need or anything.
I appreciate the trainings and the certifications, so I have the knowledge to help my peers.
I think POSSE, from the model that we use with training youth and then having youth become sort of outreach personnel in their own communities, is really effective in basically creating this exponential network or communities of care, right? So we get calls now all the time from youth who might have been involved with POSSE in the past, who aren't anymore, who still sort of know what we do as an organization, and will call us and let us know if they see somebody they think needs help. And, you know, just in them doing that and then explaining to their peer groups who may not know about us, you know, explaining what we do, it creates these really continuously growing networks of people who will, you know, speak up or do something or care.
Bonnie?
Yeah.
I like that we help youth that don't really have many people, like they don't have anybody. You guys.
I like that part too.
Good, okay. Next slide, if we can move.
There we go.
Yeah, so one theme that I think has come up a couple times is POSSE's ability to sort of adapt and evolve, because everything is youth-led, and we have, instead of like a stakeholders group or a board of directors, we have a collaborative. So we meet once a month with youth and other service providers, and that's our decision-making process. So within that, we have a lot of flexibility to sort of what our mandates are and our next steps are and stuff, which kind of leads me to the opportunity that I have, which is a dream job to work on the development of a model of non-police, also known as civilian or community-based crisis response. So that's something we're working on now, which essentially is work that we're already doing as POSSE, where anyone can come in and access our service, access harm reduction supplies, access food support, get connected to referrals to other services they may not have known about. But we're trying to formalize that and solidify that to, you know, expand our capacity to do that. So right now we operate kind of Monday to Friday, you know, 9 to 4, but the reality is crises don't happen 9 to 4, they happen at all times. So, you know, we're trying to solidify what it is we're able to provide and offer anybody and everybody in our communities. So that started out, the last 6 months I've been doing a lot of community engagement sessions, so talking to folks from really all over the province, I mean, folks from outside the province as well. And, you know, certainly still right now would say to everyone in the audience, anyone who has an opinion or would like to discuss what a non-police crisis response model to them should and could look like, then please do reach out. But the last 6 months I've spent time specifically starting with more marginalized or communities, historically marginalized communities or voices that might not be as amplified and engaging with them in what they would want to see through a non-police crisis response model. And now we have this sort of model that's been co-developed by everyone with a lot of different input. It's kind of everybody's model a little bit. And now we're trying to take it to the next step and to try to get it funded. So it would be a peer-based model. So we'd have peers and clinicians, so folks with lived experiences and folks from clinician backgrounds with mental health to be able to be paid physicians to respond in pairs with a mobile capacity. We're hoping to launch a pilot in West Hants in the not so distant future. So we're really excited that's going to happen. And then recently as well, we've had another addition to our team working on the development of that, which is Mackenzie, and I'll pass it over to Mackenzie so she can explain what she's working on.
Thanks, Ben. And yeah, so my position is just looking more at the training curriculum aspect of the model that Ben kind of just explained really thoughtfully. My position is funded by the Government of Canada under the Community Services Recovery Fund. And what we're really interested in doing is figuring out, essentially, POSSE has already been doing this crisis response. This group has been, receiving calls like I mentioned. They've been on the ground. They've been doing outreach. People have been doing drop-ins and walk-ins, and they come in all states. They come in, sometimes not sober. They come in, experiencing mental health concerns. They come in experiencing housing concerns, disputes with their neighbors, all kinds of stuff. And the folks at POSSE are supporting them through those. And so what we're doing right now is writing all of that down. So we're just making just writing it down, formalizing it a little bit, and figuring out how it's working and why it's working in all of those little pieces. And really the program is going to be founded in those same pieces that POSSE is, harm reduction, human rights, critical race theory, disability justice, all of those core pieces that POSSE exudes, is just in every space, is going to be founded in our training curriculum as well.
Thank you. There's an amazing team. And also just to add, we are open in our office from 9 to 4, but we are doing outreach and or training depending on the time of year from 6 till 9 in each of the communities. So we have an evening component because if some of the youth are in school or people might be working, and then just also we want to be available to provide services and support when other services are shut down. And we're hoping to be able to expand on those hours in our crisis response. So POSSE really, as you see there here, it's about the process. It's not just what we do, but it's how we do it that makes it effective. And that's why I wanted I was like, yes, let's just show them. And so normally we start a check-in, which we kind of did in the beginning, but not quite in the same in-depth way we would when we are starting our training/groups. We call them trainings, and we're bringing in people for training, but it's interesting the feedback we get from some of the folks who come is they call it group. And why? Why do some of you call it group?
It's more supportive than support group sometimes, so.
It's also the fact that if you call it training, it sounds like it's something you have to do, whereas a group is optional, and POSSE will be optional, so we don't have to go every week.
Yeah, that's right. There's no mandate to come to POSSE. It's all based on people's desire to. And so typically we would start one of our training/groups with a talking stick, and everybody would have an opportunity. We sit in a circle to check in, say how they are, introduce their pronouns so that people know that, and then maybe talk about something they might need to in that moment. So we can also then get a gauge of how they're doing. And sometimes we're just like, yeah, you know what, I'm having a bad day. And bring that vulnerability to the table through leadership, right? I struggle, I have hard days, and I'm not afraid sometimes to be like, actually, I'm really grieving today. Somebody just died, or I'm actually just struggling for whatever the reason is. And that opens the door, I think, for people then to feel like they can be real with their own lives as well. We just get to be human with each other. And so we create collectively at the beginning of our group/training, like when we start in November and we have new people coming in, and then periodically this happens kind of throughout the season. We start by establishing safe space. So I'm gonna
Move is something.
And so. What do you need for a safe space?
Policy, non-judgmental, confidential.
Okay,
Anti-ism space.
Hmm?
Anti-ism space.
Oh, can you elaborate on what that means?
We don't like sexism, we don't like, any of those type of things. We do like feminism, we don't like humanism, but none of the other isms that are, the bad ones. Yeah.
And no sexism, no racism, no heterosexism, no genderism, ableism, ageism.
But yay to humanism and feminism.
Right.
No snack shaming is a favorite. I wanted to add something that you love about group as well. We always bring snacks.
Food is important.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. And then we made it
I
clear that
require.
we're not gonna shame people for what they're eating. We're not gonna come like to eat, take the food, enjoy the food. Yeah.
Don't judge me for eating 4 donuts.
I'll like, encourage you to eat it.
I know you will.
What else do you need for a safe space?
Active listening.
Bodily autonomy in the way of also just feeling like no one in the group can speak about my body in a way that I don't want them to. And if I bring something up, like I got a nice haircut and I'm really excited about it, that kind of gives everybody permission to say like, yes, I do really like your haircut, Gracie, but maybe I got a haircut that I don't like and I don't want everybody to comment on it. So kind of that kind of thing. Yeah.
True inclusion, so like not inclusion in the sense that we're gonna include you, but we don't know what that looks like, so you're gonna be off to the side like I was in Girl Guides, but like actually include in the collaborative and the conversations and the trainings and the development of those trainings so that I can be just as part of the group, just like everyone else, and that my cerebral palsy doesn't stop me from being part of the group.
love that.
Also like acknowledging that everyone's coming from a different space and a different teaching, so we all are learning from each other.
I'd say too, like a willingness to learn and like an open mind. So coming with, an understanding that you have a lens, that other people have a lens, but that you might be willing to learn from what other people have to say.
Everyone's an expert on their own lives, and don't try and impose your thoughts into their life.
We don't allow any shapes or weapons into the group space.
Except for that one time. No shame, no what, no violence. We don't love violence.
But also like no shanks or weapons, but also people are allowed to like show up
As we-
as they are, and if sometimes they're not sober.
Just without shapes or weapons.
No shanks, no weapons. And outreach is a different thing, but group and training, yeah, you can be whatever state you are as long as you're not a church.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to elaborate on that for a minute. So we have a harm reduction lens, and that's what we work from. People can show up whether they're under the influence or not. And literally what we focus on, which I feel like should be best practice and policy for every organization that services humans, including our housing policies, is behavior, right? So it's not about whether people are using substances or not. It's more about like, are they behaving in safe manners? And if they're not, what kind of supports do they need? And we need to stop actually like getting into the business about what's in people's bodies, not our business.
Yeah. The other side of that is like, I don't, what, 2019, not a single person has been banned. Like, there's no, oh, you had a bad day, now you can never come back. And so there might have been an instance where someone has been like, tonight might not be the night for you to be here. Like, that might be a safety concern, but the door remains open.
Give second, third chances, fourth chances.
I mean, I'm still here. No, that was.
And they've been really forgiving with you.
We all respect one another. I think that's a good point to add.
Anyone else here have any Anybody up here?
Yeah, so we want to know, do you have anything that needs to be added to this? Because one of the beautiful things about all of our documentation, about the way that we work is it's living, it's organic, and it can always be adapted and changed as it needs to be. So is there something we're missing that you feel needs to be included here? Oh, lots of hands, lots of, okay, we'll start here, there, and then there, okay?
Calling people in instead of out.
Oh, can you
Oh,
elaborate on that?
Yeah.
So if somebody is doing something that, you have the privilege of learning, have learned a lesson in the past that, you know, might not be the most appropriate, language to use, might be stigmatizing, might be creating an unsafe place for others, we invite them to reflect on that and why they're doing that and what does that mean? And then why are they using that word? Instead of just saying, hey, don't do that.
Yeah.
That is one thing that we really value. We also like to use the term brave space instead of safe space because we can never guarantee that
Yeah.
spaces are safe. But
Yeah.
I would say we're creating a space where we're inviting people to be brave and speak out in things that might be causing unsafe.
Love
to others.
it. Love it.
Awesome. And then I was there. Respected communication style?
Yeah,
Okay, can you elaborate on that? And if you don't mind throwing your, I have all of these.
just respect about communication style. Sometimes people may touch on verbal days or have different ways of communicating, so people may be more physical communication style. Yeah. a whole bunch of stuff.
I love that.
Love that. Thank you. Okay, and
Well, I always like to remind people of, respect for yourself. You're there to talk about, and you need to give yourself a minute, give yourself.
love that. One self and then self-care, right? Okay, anybody else? Yes.
Building off that, you can be kind to yourself in a lot of ways, like making that, like, you best you can, and like, you kind to yourself, like, don't beat yourself up.
Hey, forgiveness for others and self, right? Grace and forgiveness.
Absolutely. Yes.
Honor your needs, but challenge your comfort.
Oh. Comfort is where we grow.
It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, being uncomfortable doesn't mean you're unsafe, and that's something we talk about often, right? Challenging comfort. And I want to come back because I actually learned this from Dr. Tommy Brothers in one training that we were doing. And that's this piece around confidentiality. And he described it because I mean, like, we're a big group and we're in small rural communities and, you know, it's very easy for people to figure out very quickly what somebody might be talking about or who. And so the teaching from Dr. Tommy Brothers that now I like to share with the group is share the teaching but not the story.
Yeah.
Right. So it's really important that you know, we try and emphasize that within our circles, especially working in small rural communities. Because when we say safe space, it really is just safer space. It was mentioned like a safe space for everybody is really a safe space for nobody. And so, like for reduction itself, there is no safe drug use, just safer, and it's the same thing in creating this safer space for you to participate and have a voice. Is there anything?
One more, your ideal statements. We're meeting with
Oh,
like
yeah.
my ideals.
Yeah, so this comes
Yeah.
from our communication training, but then also becomes part of our safer space guidelines. And that's that, anytime you need to express whatever's going on, it's an I feel, and you're taking responsibility for what we're feeling. It's not like this notion that somebody makes us feel things. It's an inside job to kind of process what we're feeling and why. And when you're communicating, to communicate using I feel as belief, as opposed to doing this. There's no wants to be coming in with a pointed finger. Yeah.
Beauty.
So. Again, like I said, it's not what we do, but how, and so the collaborative development, program delivery involving peers. We vote by consensus within our circle, and so what's really unique and why it's really important to me, like, people have said, well, why don't you just make POSSE its own not-for-profit? And why? There's like many not-for-profits that already have volunteer boards and are already doing great work, like the Big Money, the Friendship Center. But I had previously been working for MetroWorks when the development of POSSE was happening. Like, I started developing that on the side with the support of MetroWorks, knowing that that's where I was going. If I could find appropriate funding that would kind of fit their mandate. But I think that that time, the CEO and myself, we always knew that there would come a point when like that harm reduction lens didn't quite really fit in with the world of MetroWorks, so employment development. Even though I was advocating heavily that harm reduction needs to be in every agency, that's so cheap. But then we're also working in an Indigenous community, and I needed an organization that could help support our work with the understanding of the cultural lens by which we're working from. And so the fit with the Big Money and Friendship Center is brilliant because they're offering that oversight for the finances, the liabilities that we need, with the understanding that we're like autonomous in our decision making. And typically a board officially doesn't allow for youth under the age of 18 to vote. They have no voting rights that are legally recognized in those decision-making processes. So having this process in place allows for the youth to have a voting voice that matters for us in our purposes. So yeah, we work by consensus with the goal being, like, if people are kind of stuck, then you live with them. And consensus means everyone needs to agree. If we ever, which has never come to this, ended up in a decision where we couldn't quite come to an agreement, then we would move to an anonymous voting process. But it's not like the typical 51-49 split. It's like 2/3 has to be in favor of the decision, and also keeping in mind whose voices are represented at the table that might be impacted by our decision and how might they be impacted. And so that's one of the policies and processes by which we work. And then we're adapting and we're pivoting, responsive to the change and the needs that youth bring to the table. During COVID, Amanda and I, like, we stayed open and
for one day while we decided what the heck we were gonna do, and then we're like, okay, we're in.
Exactly, and then immediately we kept our door open because we recognized people who were dealing with housing insecurity, who had been like couch surfing, suddenly were getting kicked out of their houses, they needed bathrooms, they needed a microwave, so like cook up the food that we had in the freezer.
And in most cases, the food bank closed, so there was no access to the food bank any longer, like everything would kind of became a touch point
for folks. And then we moved heavily into food distribution. At that time, we were partnered with MetroWorks, who also had a connect with Feed Nova Scotia. So we were able to get lots of food out to people, as well as continuing to offer harm reduction supplies and support. And then we were seeing, of course, the spike in the toxic drug supply, which heavily impacted our community during COVID. And we faced a couple of fatal poisonings. So our door was open for folks during that time to just come and be in safe space to breathe and breathe from the loss. Yeah, so the how in which we do. We remain relevant by engaging youth and them telling us what they need and want. It's a beautiful group of people. I just wanted to bring this picture to light because there's a woman here, Barbie Burkhardt, who lost her daughter to suicide, and who had also been exploited. And Barbie held a fundraiser and then donated that money to us to be able to then have some cash on hand to support folks in meaningful ways. And so they came in to our collaborative. We meet at the Den, typically in Sackville, so it's kind of in between like Windsor, West Canada, and Vegas, and it's just a big enough space for us to meet. And this was the check presentation. Yeah. There as well, a little baby. Okay. So in preparing for this presentation, we did brainstorm some stuff out with you.
And so we're not gonna really pay attention to the slide ourselves, but we're gonna flip to the next thing and I'm gonna ask you folks, what do we do that makes POSSE meaningful in engaging you?
So I can't emphasize this enough, as I've been in the group for 4 years now, I grew up with them. They really create a sense of home for me. Like I don't necessarily have the space to talk about certain things at my house or with friends or family. And so to be able to have a supportive space where we talk about whatever you want to talk about, people were always there to support you or whatever you needed. It was really supportive, yeah.
Just to echo what Juliana said, I actually moved here from British Columbia 6 years ago and joined POSSE 2 years ago, and I didn't have a family out here. So for me, having a group that I could come to on even just a weekly basis, but also knowing there was an open office space that I could come to connect with Kim and Amanda and have those supports, especially as a young trans man in Nova Scotia, that allowed me to actually get some of my healthcare that I have now and get set up and be in the place that I am. So it is like a family. Even if you're not from Nova Scotia. No matter where you're from.
No matter where,
Yeah.
we'll love you.
Yeah.
I can come as I am, and I'm not required to bring anything, but I can bring anything, including my emotions and any baggage that comes up.
Alright.
Stunning. She doesn't.
I think the consistency and the stability in POSSE as an organization plays a big role for a lot of people. So we're, the organization, someone is always there, whether it's a staff, quote unquote, or a peer, quote unquote. I mean, really the lines get blurred all the time. We're all doing the stuff, right? All the time. So, yeah, I think just always being there in every community, every week, once a week, right? Like there's just that sense of consistency that there's always that option for anyone who wants it.
And with that too, there's also a level of transparency at both the human and program level, which Kim has touched on a little bit, where we all bring our emotions into the space. If I'm having a bad day, sometimes I'm going to be pretty open about that, and we're going to be on the same page. We meet people where they're at, and our youth also meet us where we're at, which is a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
It focuses on the fact that we all come from lived experience, and that's going to be part of our day-to-day lives.
Yeah, and Kim and I have had this conversation with others too, this idea of professionalism, where professionalism removes you from the humanism that connects all of us, and that if you're a professional, you're not supposed to like have your feelings or like show your feelings, which is not realistic and it's really harmful. And this being able to come as ourselves, even on not great days, means that it's just a demonstration that all the feelings are welcome, and it doesn't make me not professional if I'm crying in front of someone who I'm making supportive who's also going through a hard time. That's just because we're now we're connected, human to human.
Or me crying when I'm talking to Thunder.
It's real empathy.
Yeah,
Real empathy.
it does, which is
Not-
authentically be yourself.
Yeah, not to mention that professionalism is a social construct.
It's BS.
Who did that?
Yeah.
You know, but-
Not me.
I know.
Some people like Diane.
Yeah, there's more.
There's more?
Yeah.
You kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but like staying relevant with like what youth really need. Like example, like one of the trainings we had one time was, we knew that we were getting stopped by cops. What are your rights with the cops when you're getting stopped by cops? What, like, do you have to look and go through your bag? What do you have to actually do when it comes to those things? Keeping it informed and keeping them relevant into what they really need.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Your hand?
Yes.
It's also the understanding, like when we're at group, that things, like not only yourself, like for me, I have brought crying children.
Yeah.
And even though like I've been overwhelmed, I've had other people in the group take them for a minute. Like, yeah, it's usually a minute, but it's the fact that even when we're just there, everybody, like, you don't even have to actually say anything. You'll just get to like know you a bit and just can see it on your face.
Yeah.
When things are a little bit much.
So in the slide, some of the other things that came up that I think are really important that you've identified is that we don't involve the authorities unnecessarily. We're not quick to do that.
And if you don't call parents, when you said I can show up when I'm sober, or not, or in a crisis or not. You make me feel safe was another quote. We don't have to judge, we can all just be there together. Posse spreads love. We have the decolonization of spaces, we talked about that. And it's already been said, this feels like a home to me. And then I learned more than I have in school, and the things that will actually help me. Was that you who said that? Yeah. So I think we're under a bit of a time thing, so we're gonna move to the next slide. And so asking the group, what learning have you used or shared with others in your daily life? So things that you've learned from Posse, that you've shared or passed on to your peers.
The lockstone training in itself is a big one. Because before Posse, I had like no understanding of that at all. And then since then, I've personally had to use it many times.
The SIS training, applied suicide prevention skills training. I have 3 close friends who are all trans, so I've had to use that multiple times. And also they get out of condoms, and I just end up having like bags of hundreds and supplying to all my friends.
Your local condom picture.
For me, it's not necessarily like what like skills I've used to like show to people, but it's more so like the, oh, I know that this training is coming up and I know somebody that this could really benefit.
Yeah.
So even being like the support of, hey, you can come with me and I will go there with you if you need it. Or, you know, hey, I can give you this information after the fact, but also it might be really good for you to connect with these people while we're out here.
Healthy relationships training is something that we partake in that I think I've used in like almost my daily life since we took it. Yeah, I was in my 3rd weekend with Posse and I've used it ever since.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of others have too.
Yeah. That mental health training, it actually helps because I have a friend who really had bad mental health. I told her, I said, I took it for you, just,
Yeah.
yeah, so that helps.
I think that being able to have the opportunity to learn about all the things that we discussed, very new, irrelevant. I mean, not irrelevant. I mean, relevant, and like modern.
Yeah.
Progressive.
Yeah. And very inviting and challenging to any point of view.
Also keeping my friends safe by giving them the supplies that they need to be safer with their substance use.
Also learned a lot about exploitation support signs, information to help support people who are in human trafficking or being exploited.
I was just gonna say, it's opened my eyes on how we as a group can like decolonize and indigenize our approaches to groups and youth involvement and harm reduction in general.
We use a circle approach because a circle is non-linear. And it shows that like nobody's above anybody else, so there's no hierarchy in the group, and I really love that. And I've shared the Kairos blanket exercise with teachers at my university and been like, there's this thing, you should do it. And some of them have been really receptive to that, so that's great.
Anything more? And I think we're also on a time,
Yeah.
so.
We could take your whole day if you got it.
Yeah, I can talk for hours, so that's why I bring other people, keep me from talking too much. And in kind of talking about that circle approach, there are times when I know that we're gonna need to speak to certain issues that might, and I don't wanna influence them, but literally body language matters, and I sit on the floor in the group. Like I actually will sit down and lower than folks so that my voice is the one that's amplified. And so that sharing of space and sharing of power and collective decision making is really fundamental to what we do. And so we'd like to say, merci beaucoup. Thank you all for being here. And then to our sponsors. So of course, the Make Money and Friendship Center, SUAP has funded us for this year and next year to operate as we are with the development of a non-police crisis response model as part of a new initiative we're doing. ViiV Healthcare, their HIV/AIDS medication has sponsored us and is literally the one paying the honorarium for all these beautiful humans to be here today as experts. And then we also have like smaller funding from the community health boards of West Hants Uniac, Copaquid, and East Hants and the West Hants Community Foundation Fund that funds our crisis intervention funds as well. And so for all those folks, their support, because of course we couldn't be here without some money.
I'm Morty, I was the name of it. In this picture here is from the pure walkabout Mainline, to the right. And then and we got a land acknowledgement. We're all in book of or Halifax. Mi'kmaq, land of Mi'kmaq. It's important that we acknowledge that we are all living in Mi'kmaq, the rightful and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. So this territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship. Which is this Jason? Yeah. Or am I? I guess. So territory is covered by the Treaties of Peace and Friendship. The Mi'kmaq signed with British Crown starting in 1725. Treaties did not deal with surrender of land and resources, but recognized the Mi'kmaq title of land and established the rules for an ongoing relationship between nations. These treaties are still in effect today. Many times over the years, Mi'kmaq had to go, of course, uphold these treaties. This includes several cases in the last 10 years. And we're seeing that now in Sonyaville. So it's important we understand our history. However, it's also crucial to understand that these are ongoing realities. So often we talk about colonization as a thing of the past, but the impacts on Indigenous people are current and far-reaching. Indigenous people are disproportionately affected by criminalization, incarceration, involvement with foster care, loss of culture and language, and lack of opportunity for education and employment. Indigenous people are also much more likely than others to report discrimination and negative experiences in healthcare settings. Our workshop today is focused on people who use drugs, not Indigenous people. But we hope to keep in mind that this is just one of the many identities that may intersect very different experiences in life when accessing healthcare. And also it can be important to recognize sense the stigma around people who use drugs and the negative stereotypes around Indigenous people. Many times, even if people do not use drugs, those stereotypes still end up affecting them, and that stigma still impacts. So this is the 7 districts of Mi'kmaq. Not my picture. Source is from NAG, the North American Indigenous Games, and it just gives an idea of the size of Mi'kmaq and also the newer colonial borders as well. And this right here is the staff of Lee to the right and then me to the left. And this is the mainline history, I guess you could say. So in all right. In 1989, the Persons with AIDS Coalition in Halifax began distributing needles in response to the HIV crisis. That's where harm reduction stems from, is response to public health issues and crisis. And that's first official, right? People were doing this before that, kind of grassroots. And then in 1992, members of that same group went on to found Mainline, the first needle exchange in the Santé Canada. And in 1993, Mainline started doing unofficial central information outreach, and it's still doing so today. Well, now official. In 1996, Mainline moved from Regular Street to Cornwallis Street, which is now going to be called North Bernard Street. And then we just stayed there until somewhat recently. Then in 1999, 5 years of effort led to Mainline's methadone program. And then by 2000, the program had outgrown Mainline and then later became Direction 8. In 2001, Mainline methadone program becomes Direction 8 methadone program. And then in 2003, Mainline officially expanded services to Lunenburg and the surrounding area. And then in 2005, Mainline began to distribute safer crack use kits. Or we call them safer use kits. The same kits can also be used for like, whatever, throwing it wall if you really feel like it, I guess, but probably not that. And then in 2009, MOSS began operating. So MOSS was the brainchild of Diane David and Patty Melanson. Patty Melanson did a lot for the community, and she's no longer with us. In 2016, Mainline partnered with Direction 80 on the take-home naloxone program, and then began distributing naloxone as a satellite for Direction. And then in 2018, Mainline started doing the Fear Walk. So to get to a little bit about what the Fear Walk is, so that's typically either a staff and a client or two clients or what have you, going out on a walk, like talking to people, seeing what they need, providing supplies, help people have a sense of purpose. I know that's how I started at Mainland, doing the Fear Walk, and gave me something positive to do with my time. And yeah, and people are paid for their time with an honorarium, right? So it is technically voluntary. Then in 2022, Mainline moved to the Cogswell Street, the current location, and we're in the same building as the Mi'kmaq Friendship Center because we are a program at the Mi'kmaq Friendship. So this is a question I feel like most people kind of get the answer to, with empathy, but yeah, as well as many other people. I mean, I work directly with the community, right? And it's very rare that I hear from somebody who uses drugs that they haven't had a negative experience in healthcare. So I'm going to talk a little bit about mine. So what brought me to the hospital? It was different for many different times. I've had endocarditis, I've had cellulitis, blood infections, and liver complications, and other stuff. Mental stuff. But I would say the first time I went to the hospital for something drug related, I would have been maybe 16 or 17. I had cellulitis in my hand, which is basically an infection of the fatty tissue in your hand. I had that from injecting. And immediately the doctors shamed me. They told me, why should we even bother you? They didn't say that, but what their words was, most of you people just leave anyway. So we're gonna get you in, and then we're gonna look at you, and you're gonna leave. And I was like, oh, okay. Thanks for telling me what I'm gonna do. So my hand was swelled out to about double the size it is now. And a lot of that experience in the hospital, I was told that doesn't hurt because swelling doesn't hurt ever, I guess. I don't know. They thought it was drug seeking. At the time, I actually wasn't an opioid user. At the time, my drug of choice was crystal meth, and they assumed since I was an injection drug user that I was an opioid user, which is a very common assumption, right? I had doctors and nurses tell me I should go on methadone, which is a opiate treatment, which kind of an odd suggestion for crystal meth, but whatever. I mean, hey, whatever, if it works for you, I guess. But and then I had the whole time it was a lot of pain, right? And trying to navigate on the weird pain scale. It's like, what do I say that makes it seem like I'm not drug seeking? Because I really wasn't. I was just trying to not be in pain. And that's a very common experience for a lot of people who use drugs in healthcare. They have this feeling that we're drug seeking, so they give us less pain medication. When oftentimes we need more, especially if we're an opioid user, because our tolerance is higher. Down the road, I became an opioid user, but at that point I was not. The other time I went to the hospital, blood infection, right? I've had some very positive experiences as well. It's not all negative. I've had nurses, take their time out of their day to ask how I'm doing when it wasn't something they needed to do and they're on their very busy shift. I had my 19th birthday in the hospital with my liver. I was told my liver was failing. And, on my 19th birthday, a nurse bought me a bag of chips, right? It was the only thing I got that year, but it meant a lot, right? That somebody who never met me before would do that, right? So regardless of your role, you can make an impact, and it's just about having empathy. And then, what made it harder to stay on many occasions, the way I was treated. Sometimes that would have been, withdrawal if I was using opiates at that point in my life. And yeah, made me want to leave, way I was treated. But the last time I was hospitalized for an extended period of time, so to go back a little bit, I was 18 when I was diagnosed with hepatitis C. And when I went into the hospital in QE2, so I moved from New Brunswick to here. Anyway, the doctor told me my liver was failing, and he looked more upset about it than I was. To be honest, at that point in my life, I've been living on the streets for an extended period of time. I had no contact with my family, and I was looking for a way out, and to me, that seemed like it, right? So I was actually kind of glad, right? That's where I was at that point in my life, and I told the doctor straight up, because at this point I was using opiates. When I got to Nova Scotia, Halifax specifically, crystal meth is not a very common drug here. It's coming around now, but it's still not like anything to what it is where I'm from. And crack to me just seems like a waste of money, and why spend $20 on something in the last 5 minutes? Sorry, but that seemed like a waste of money to me, and also my mental health was very deteriorated at that point. And I decided that opiates would be the safer route for me at that point in my life, and it was, right? My mental health started to recuperate quite a bit. I wasn't constantly in a drug-induced psychosis. However, I was still using every day, right? So that goes to show that sometimes abstinence isn't the goal for people, but there still can be positive changes made, right? However, so I'm in the hospital, and I told the doctor straight up, if you don't give me something for my withdrawal, not even the pain, for my withdrawal, I will leave. And he said, well, you'll die. And I said, that's on you. Because that's at the point I was at. I knew I would die, but I didn't care. I just didn't want to feel the way I was feeling. However, they ended up actually prescribing me enough to deal with withdrawal, not enough to be like high or anything, but just to not be in withdrawal. And that helped me stay quite a bit, right? Other experiences I've had in hospitals, like I went into the hospital with brand new injection equipment, and healthcare providers thinking they're doing the right thing, taking those from me. However, not realizing that, I'm gonna find a way. So, going downstairs into the sharps container and using a used needle out of a sharps container in a hospital, right? So like, hepatitis C contraction should not be happening in hospitals, period, right? And there's a clear way to prevent that. If somebody has brand new injecting equipment, don't take it from them, because they're gonna use something that's not brand new, right? Not all the time, it depends on the individual, but in my case, right? And but we've had some changes in that, and I will get into that later. When I left, the majority of times I've left hospital, I went straight back to the streets. The last time I left the hospital after an extended stay was they actually made sure I got into a shelter. which was the most stable I've ever left a hospital, right? And it's kind of nice, right? Going to have a bed when you leave the shelter after all this time, you know? However, it kind of shows that it's not just one of these areas we need to work on. Housing is a huge part. If you don't have a safe place to send people when they're leaving hospitals, they're just gonna come right back. Yeah, I think you open that enough, I think, yeah. So this is all like just studies and stuff on, just so you know, I'm not just speaking from my own experience. But some of the impacts of stigma and inadequate healthcare, so people avoid and delay or refuse to access care. Even today, I still do that, right? And I've not taken, I mean, I smoke and I drink caffeine, you know what I mean? But like I don't really do anything other than that anymore. But I still avoid care because of the treatment that I received, right? So I had chest pain, and at this point I had like 2 years sober, 3 years, I don't know. I had a relatively long amount of time sober, and I refused to go to the health hospitals until somebody talked me in. And then when I got to the hospital, I waited in emerge for 6 hours, and they said, "You're not having a heart attack." Cool, figured that out on my own. But yeah, so you know, but in a situation where I was, if I was refusing to go to healthcare, that could have a serious impact, right? And that's documented through several studies that are stated there if you want to look it up, I guess. And then more likely to leave AMA or self-discharge or public initiated discharge. I'm not familiar with that. That is more newer language. I mean, I've left against medical advice on several occasions, and often that has to do with there being inadequate resources in healthcare. And then readmissions, further complications, and secondary conditions. No, okay. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, if you kick people out of the hospital before they have a chance to actually get the health care they need, they're just gonna come back with a worsened condition. Oh, yeah, sorry. So this is some challenges for care providers. So when I'm doing a presentation like this to healthcare providers, I like to add this in just so I don't feel like I'm attacking them. Because when people get their defenses up, they're not really learning anymore. And if people don't know better, they can't do better, right? So, and also I find this helps me understand where people were coming from when they did the things they did, right? So this is all very well documented, you know, complex needs and behaviors, a lack of training and preparation, right? Doctors are not trained in harm reduction at all, for the most part, right? If they are, it's from someone like me or someone like Kim from POSSE, right? It's not really in their curriculum, right? But we're bringing it to them. We're bringing it to them, right? So that's the main thing. And then their own perspectives and experiences, right? Sometimes people feel like, oh, my father drank a lot, blah, 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 so I understand this. Maybe you don't. You don't. You know, and people can take those experiences and bias towards the people they're treating and often have negative consequences, right? And then a mutual mistrust. I don't trust doctors. Doctors don't trust me, right? So, and it's documented through studies, but I can also just tell you that from my experience. And then what we see in Halifax often is a non-existent policies, right? And a lot of, I mean, there's some pretty bad policies as well, but for the most part, it's non-existent policies. And when there's no policy in place, healthcare providers are just left guessing because they don't want to lose their license, and you know they're just trying to play it safe. So somebody might go into the hospital, and one healthcare provider might just look the other way at somebody doing something, and somebody else might call the cops, right? So it can create some pretty negative impacts, right? And then lack of resources in hospital and community. So what is Mainline doing? So we're trying to encourage / support hospitals to adopt harm reduction approaches. But part of that is me and Joe and Kim from POSSE have been going into hospitals quite often, right? And doing workshops with them. We do a values exercise that Kim came up with, and you know, you kind of see what their beliefs are, and you can kind of challenge them in a healthy, constructive way. And oftentimes you see people actually change their mind about something. And then how much time do I have? Okay, cool. So, you know, training, right? And then, materials. So the hospital in, the QE2 now has a brown bag program. Which if anybody's not aware of the brown bag program is basically this picture right here. So in there is 10 needles, either long tip or short tip. The long tips are 12.7 millimeters, they're half an inch long. I don't know if they are millimeters. The short tips are 8 millimeters in length, and a lot of that's preference on why somebody. I'm not going to get in because I know other stuff. But if you want to find out more about that, I can talk to you. So and then we have like swabs, filters, hookers, which are basically just like a sterile spoon. Because as you can imagine, if you're using a spoon, sometimes you eat from that, all kinds of bacteria in your mouth that you don't want in your bloodstream. So, and then a tie, just so help see your veins, you're less likely to miss. And yeah, so that's now in the hospitals, and it's also in over 100 pharmacies in the province. So a big thing with that is sometimes people don't want to be seen going to Mainline, and that's fine, right? There's a lot of stigma. I mean, what's that?
Just a real quick question, if somebody's in the hospital, how they have some brown bag program?
Good question. It's not clear. So we've had some cases of nurses not knowing about it. But now, there is a service up and running in the hospital now, and it should be a lot easier for them to access that now, without saying more than. You know, confidentiality, but yeah, but it's not really, but yeah, so you could ask a nurse about it, or a doctor. If Dr. Tony Brothers is there, he's the guy to talk to, right? And that's just my personal opinion, but yeah. And then, you know, with pharmacies, right? So sometimes our folks in rural areas, we're only there every 3 weeks, right? People don't just use drugs once every 3 weeks. Some people do, right? I know somebody who just smokes crack once a year, you know, and if you can do that, good for you. I can't, but you know, so it really depends on the individual, but we try to have, you know, the brown bag program in as much places as possible, and it's now in parts hospital. And then sorry, it's all good. So building relationships with healthcare providers, outreach to clients and patients in hospital, and then working with people who are coming in and doing like shadow shifts at the office. So to speak a little bit on outreach to clients in hospitals. So that when I was in the hospital for over 2 months with my liver, and I guess I had some heart issues too or whatever, but you know, Mainline came in every single day and they visited. It wasn't even about getting supplies, it was having somebody to talk to, right? And that was basically it for people who visited me. I had a couple people that I knew who lived on the streets come in, and that was it, right? So that can be very important to some people. I know it was for me at least. And now, so there's often some assumption made in healthcare about people who use drugs, you know, so trying to reframe those. I'd say one of the most important ones is, I know I'm starting at the bottom here, but I am. Not everyone who uses drugs has substance use disorder, right? And if you go to the hospital once and you have cocaine in your system, you're flagged, right? There's lots of people who just use cocaine here and there, right? Not everybody who drinks alcohol has a problem with alcohol, right? And then as well, you know, that kind of line of thinking contributes to stigma, right? So, and then substance use disorder, which I'm diagnosed with, I suppose, is a chronic health condition and should be addressed. In fact, often it's treated as a moral failing, right? It's a health thing, right? At least that's from my perspective, right? And then this stuff up here, inconsistent care, which I already speak on a little bit, stigmatization and all that reinforces mutual trust, mistrust in healthcare systems, right? And that's very well documented. And it's not realistic to expect patients to stop using drugs when they come into hospital. Often that expectation can cause a lot of harm. I didn't even think about this as a potential harm, but a doctor pointed out to me. I was like, wow, okay. But you know, locking the door to inject when you're in the hospital, right? Now they can't get at you, say if you were to have a drug poisoning. I never thought about that because that's just what you do when you inject drugs, in my experience, right? But you know, it's yeah, so that reinforces stigma, right? People shouldn't be ashamed and have to hide it, because if you're hiding it, then you're at a higher chance of death, right? And then it's important to examine policy practices, you know, like we have, how might we apply harm reduction principles to these scenarios? Are the protocols in place to guide staff? You know, a lot of programs in the city require abstinence, right? There's a question mark there because sometimes there can be a time and a place for it. I think it exists on a spectrum for what some people want, right? But having everything require abstinence is causing a lot of harm. If I have to go to a shelter and I'm not allowed to have drugs on me, then I'm going to lose my place to sleep.
Yeah.
Right? If I get kicked.
So like, it's also this idea that if you use a drug of choice, so maybe you're not trying to use that drug of choice, if you're trying to use, you want to use another one for harm reduction, and they go, oh, it's absolutely nothing. So you can anything that you might use, even though this one isn't necessarily just problematic.
Yeah.
That absolutely.
I mean, I've had problematic caffeine use, you know, like I've drank a case of Red Bull every day for a while, right? And it's like probably not safe caffeine use, but you know, every stuff just can have that, right? But like some of the addiction treatment programs in Halifax won't take you if you're on methadone, right? Which is ridiculous, you know. And they're also making a lot of changes, actually making it harder to get into those programs. So to my knowledge, the one I went to, I would not be eligible to get into. So that's cool, I guess, you know. So, you know, sharp safety, right? There should be policies around sharp safety, right? And then search and seizure of patients' belongings, oftentimes this takes place and it's very invasive, right? I just recently read on a policy for a certain hospital that I will not name, that they have a strip search policy, right? You're healthcare providers, not cops. Still, yeah, chill out, right? Like, you know, and then is there the provision of harm reduction supplies in the hospital, and how do we deal with time off work and pain management, right? These are often questions that need to be had, and nobody should be getting kicked out of the shelter for having an naloxone, you know. So some things we can do, you know, we can draw on resources to help and advise. So invite collaboration with community partners. So for example, MOD, Mainline Direction with 80, Out of the Cold, POSSE, the list goes on, you know. And then, oh yeah, so I can speak on this apparently. So the inpatient addiction medicine consult service is that service now available in the hospital. I just wasn't sure if I want to speak on it, but I guess I am. So it has to be healthcare provider initiated, not patient initiated, which is a barrier, but at least it's there for now, right? It's a big step in the right direction. And then existing work to update policies, meaningfully engage people who use drugs in decision-making and programming. And meaningfully is underlined very often when you have people with lived experience, you get like one of us in a room and we're not allowed to really talk much, you know? Or when we do talk, you don't listen to anything we say. But you're doing the work by having us there. That's sarcasm. Yeah, so, you know, meaningfully engaged. Like I'm on a board of directors for an organization, and it actually is mostly lived experience. But when I first got involved in that board of directors, it was like, there was nothing there to help me understand any of the language that you understand on the board of directors, because I think to most people, a lot of the language is very confusing, right? Especially for somebody who dropped out of school, right? So, yeah, meaningfully is important. You know, like Matt said, nothing about us without us, right? And more than one of us in the room. And then listen to the patient's story, preferences, goals, you know, like was already said, different people have different goals, right? Some people might want to shift from injecting to smoking. Some people might want to go completely abstinent. Some people, you know, might not want to change anything, but they want to stay alive, right? Like it's focused on the individual, because I know for myself, when people try to pressure anything onto me, it never works, right? Yeah, and I think that's the last slide. However, I will say, like, just to end on something earlier, I guess, but there's a lot of assumptions about people who use drugs, like on not being honest, lying, things like this, and oftentimes that's not the case. And actually, like being honest sometimes got me in a lot of trouble in healthcare, right? Basically, every time I would just be straight up like, "Oh yeah, I'm an injection drug user and I use this and this and this." And then immediately be treated like garbage because I'm being honest. So of course I'm gonna lie. I'm gonna treat you like shit for lying for telling the truth, right? Sorry for swearing. I know this is maybe like on something. Yeah, but yeah, like even with family, right? Like my mom being like, "You need to stop using drugs," and I'm like, "You know, I'm not ready," right? You know, just that honesty piece was there for me a lot of the time. It wasn't always, right? But oftentimes we make assumptions on people based on that, right? And it's not necessarily fair.